Data Storytellers. This is a long anticipated episode that we're having today on the Data Storytellers podcast. Very special guest, Carol Wilson. We've been working together for a while, since last year, and Carol has been contributing to our community in various ways, bringing a lot of value to our conversations, contributing a data story as well, and we're going to meet in person for the first time in Austin later this year. So we're looking forward to that. And Carol, welcome on the show.
Thank you, Laz. It's good to be here.
So yeah, finally made it happen. And Carol, I think a bunch of our community members will already know you, but those who are not familiar with who you are and your background, would you mind giving a short introduction into your current role and what you do? What's your mission today?
Sure. So I am Director of Advanced Analytics at Canada Post Corporation. So and I've been doing that in that role for about 5.5 years. And I run a team of 8 data scientists who take all the kind of digital data that we have at Canada Post, and we have a lot of it because we scan every parcel that goes through our network approximately 8 times. And so we're helping out with, the network of keeping the parcels being delivered and the letter mail being delivered, but also looking at data, just trying to analyze our business to try and make us more efficient for the future and more cost effective. So that's what I currently do. But when I started my career after getting a master's in psychology and statistics, experimental psychology and statistics, I was in market research for about 15, probably 20 years. And so that's where a lot of my expertise in sampling and research methods and statistics came from. So working in that area. And then I moved on to be director of a similar group of data scientists for a casino business where we sold slot machines. So I was, working with granular data on that. So been in a lot of different industries, but kind of landed explicitly doing more advanced analytics than market research lately. But that market research gave me a great background into understanding how sampling works and statistics work.
Absolutely. And I think we also bonded over some of our hobbies as well. I think over time, I didn't know that you actually work for a casino. That's pretty cool.
A slot manufacturer. So I visited lots of casinos and played a lot of poker in different casinos.
Okay, there you go. We actually talked about poker many times on the podcast, but I think you're probably the front runner in terms of experience, just based on what we talked about.
We'll see in Texas.
Yeah, we might test that out in Austin for sure. And so I lived in multiple countries. So Hungary and the UK, they are both kind of famous for efficient postal services. But now I've been in Canada, and I can tell you that you guys are doing something right, because Canada Post is actually the service and the efficiency, punctuality, and all that. Maybe it's because of your data-driven processes under the hood. I'm not sure. So basically, with Canada Post, you're there right now. What is your current mandate and mission? So what are you focusing on right now? What is the stage of data maturity, and what are you looking at now in terms of achieving something great and exciting?
Probably about, just 3 or 4 years ago, the top executives at Canada Post decided to make our goal being a data-driven business, because for many years, Canada Post has been in business for 250 years. So a lot of that was, manual labor and trying to get things physically out there. But now that we have lots of digital data, so we're trying to change our mindset from the goal is just trying to get the package where it's going to analyzing our data so that we can be a more efficient and cost effective, because now we're in a very competitive market where when most of our business came from letter mail, which is not the case anymore, but when it mostly came from letter mail, we we have a monopoly on letter mail. So we don't have a competitor there. So in the last 10 years, we've had to change to being competitive in the parcel market, because with e-commerce, the parcels are really where the money is being made and the businesses are thriving. But it's a very crowded market with lots of different small companies doing their own delivery, as well as big companies like Purolator and FedEx doing deliveries. So we have to be competitive mindset. And so in order to do that, we had to look at our data to find efficiencies. So that is the goal of Canada Post, to be a data-driven company. And my goal, particularly for my team, is to educate a lot of the other parts of the business on data literacy, first of all, so that they can handle some simple things themselves, which frees up my team to be able to do more machine learning. And we're getting into AI. So we want to be focused on things like predictive and prescriptive analytics, and let the descriptive and diagnostic analytics be done by the business themselves. With our guidance, we'll educate as much as possible. So there's kind of, I guess, two things. We want to educate the business, and also we want to excel and move up the maturity ladder. And the talk that I'll be speaking to, it exactly shows that over the last 5-6 years, we have moved up the ladder trying to get more mature in our analytical space.
Absolutely. And you mentioned the team. I didn't plan on this, but maybe we can spend just a few minutes on that, because we recorded a great data story with you that actually many of our members enjoyed, and they are applying it. It's such a cool short playbook. We won't have the bandwidth to hash it out fully, but would you maybe talk a little bit about that? What is that playbook that you have on finding superstar data talent?
Yes.
And how did you develop that?
So, and I actually wrote a medium.com article on it too. So if you search for my name under there, you can find it. And it's called How I Hire a Data Science Superstar. Because when I first got into this role of having to hire data scientists, some were successful and some were not as successful, or didn't quite have the skills we needed, or didn't have the combination of skill and communication ability. Because I do believe one of my strengths is that I can take complex, machine learning ideas or whatever, and simplify them so that anyone can understand. And just trying to reiterate to people that it's the same old math that has always been done. It's just that we can do it so much faster and quicker, which allows us to do different techniques, because we can do so many calculations every second. It just opened up a whole new world of analytics to us. But my process is multi-stage, and the reasons for it are, I want people who really want to be on my team, who put the effort in the interview process. It has a few different phases, but after each phase, I give feedback to the people that were not successful to move on to the next phase, because I want them to learn from the experience. So the first one would be that we scan all the resumes, and for every job opening, we might get 300, 400 resumes. We scan the resumes to find people who say they're proficient in Python, machine learning, cloud computing, have the right, degree. So we scan, and we pick probably 40 or 50 of them to send out a quick online quiz. So the online quiz, there's a stats quiz, which has a lot of fundamental stats in it, because I'm really a big believer in you have to understand the fundamentals before you move on to machine learning. And that's one of the things that I think is kind of missing in people that maybe get a master's or PhD in data science. Some of that fundamental stuff isn't there. They move right to doing random forest. They've never done an ANOVA by hand, right? They've never figured out sum of squares by hand or done a t-test by hand. So those kind of things are important so that you understand why something works. So there's a stats quiz, and then there's a coding quiz, which my data scientists mark, because their Python is much better than mine, because I've been in management roles for quite a while now. So there's Python coding quiz that we do. And the ones that we see the most potential in there get invited to do a case study. So they get 1 week to work on a case study. And the part that I mark is the executive level presentation that they're to do from this scenario that we set up for this business problem we gave them. And what I want to see in a business, the executive level presentation is, I don't want to see 20 decimal places. I don't want to see Python code. I want to see a finding and data that supports it. Give me a graph that supports it. And, another pet peeve of mine is not labeling your axes. You got to label them. You got to say what the sample is, all that. So I'm looking at it from how are they going to capture an executive's attention? Because if you start off going, oh, this was our methodology and we did this cool technique, blah, 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 and we cleaned some of them go into how they clean the data in the executive presentation. They don't care. You'll have lost them. You got to start out with a bang and saying, this was a business problem. This is what we found, and I'm going to prove it to you. Basically, that's your steps in there. And then my data scientists, they'll mark the Jupyter notebooks or all the actual calculations that the people did. And then the top 4 or 5 of those get invited to director level interviews with myself and some other directors, and also an interview with the data scientists on my team. And then we pick one. And by then they've grown quite attached to us and we've grown attached to them. So I think I really get people who are very eager to work on our team, which really helps. Oh, another thing I should mention, the case study is marked blind, which I'm very proud of because I don't want to be influenced either positively or negatively by your name, where you went to school, all that. I want to mark it blind. And so we don't actually find out who wrote what case study until after myself and the senior data scientists have marked them. And then we get the big reveal, which I love because we're already rooting for some of them. But if they didn't do well in the case study, sorry. But I give feedback and I go through the case studies with them at the end. So hopefully, and a lot of them have said they really enjoyed the experience, even if they weren't the successful candidate.
Absolutely. I always appreciated kind of your objectivity and commitment to evaluating everything on their own merit. And really not being, I think even I wouldn't say necessarily disdain, but you're not, want to just do small talk for the sake of small talk, right? You just like to get to the.
Let's talk about interesting stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And then speaking of interesting stuff, I think you did share with me a few success stories and also not so successful stories of some of these interviews. Do you have a favorite that's very educational, maybe both for leaders who are conducting the interviews, but maybe even future candidates on what to do and what not to do?
Yeah. One thing that I really enjoyed during the director level interview is asking the candidate to explain the Monty Hall problem and explain why the answer is what it is. Because what that does is shows us is this person can actually explain to director level people, and the other directors are not necessarily data people. Most of them are not that interview. I'm the only data person there. So they're looking at it from an executive point of view and they're going, okay, try and explain the Monty Hall problem to me because it's a counterintuitive answer to the Monty Hall. And I'm sure people can just Google the Monty Hall problem to find out what it is. But I tell the candidates beforehand, you're going to be asked to explain the Monty Hall problem and then to explain why the answer is what it is to other executives. So they're not blindsided if they've never heard of the Monty Hall problem. They can research it as much as they want. But what I'm looking for is how can they very concisely explain the problem and the solution without making it too convoluted and without visual effects. Like some people do a whole presentation with doors, and the doors are actually they do one of those things the kids do now with the 3D diagrams and stuff, dioramas or whatever. I don't know. And so they do that. And I go, no, I want you to speak it. So we've had some very good ones, and the best ones are the ones that aren't repeating to me just what the internet explained the problem is, but they're doing it in their own words, and I can tell that they really understand what the problem is. So that really separates the people who can think on their feet and explain things clearly from people who just memorize what the answer was and they're not really thinking it through. because on my team, I want critical thinkers and fast thinkers, people who think quickly, but critically. So they're able to digest information very quickly, but they're very thoughtful in how they critically evaluate it. And then they only explain things when they actually fully understand them.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And then maybe just to spend another minute on this topic, because there is all kinds of personality profiles and psychological assessments.
Yeah.
And a lot of them might seem, and some of them might be obsolete or not that useful, but there are a few very practical ones that even I've been using for finding people that we like working with and who can bring value in a unique way to an organization. And I think you and I both compared our personality profiles on the Bristol-Myers, the 16 personalities.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So just from your experience, is there like a specific profile of candidate that usually turns out to be an exceptional contributor in a data science role? Have you identified a type of personality profile there?
Well, I think there's probably several profiles that fit, but there are certainly some profiles that don't fit very well. And I think the kind of profile, the kind of people who don't fit in well with a data science career are extreme extroverts who want to be out talking, meeting people, who probably would fit better in sales or something better than that. Because we spend a lot of our time being intimate with data, not with people. So we want someone that really enjoys being focused and understanding problems, but then also gets a kick out of explaining those problems to other people later. There is a definite difference between being shy and being an introvert. A lot of my data scientists are introverts, but that doesn't mean they're shy. Introverts just get their energy from more internally and trying to be like focused and thinking about the thoughts in their own head and working through things, where extroverts get energy from other people. A shy person is not speaking to a lot of people because it makes them uncomfortable. But introverts are not speaking to a lot of people because there's a lot of people that aren't going to help them get better, or like, there's only certain kinds of people that you want to talk to, people who are interested in the same kind of thing you are. So when we get together, we all talk like crazy, but you put us in a party that's just small talk all night and we're probably not going to say a word, because that just isn't what we don't enjoy the actual interaction for the interaction. We enjoy it for the advancement of thinking about something cool or talking about new ideas. That's what excites us.
Absolutely. That's a very important distinction there. Exactly. That being an introvert is not necessarily being shy. I mean, I know many, many introverts who really dread parties. They don't like mingling and all that stuff, but they are very comfortable with public speaking. Right? But they actually have something to talk about. Just needs to be said. That's not a problem. So yeah, that's a very important distinction.
Yeah, because I'm not shy at all, but I'm very much an introvert in that I love giving presentations and talking about my stuff, but going to parties, I dread. I often just don't show up because my fear is I'm going to get stuck with someone who just wants to talk about their weekend. And I'm going to be bored silly.
So this is a great segue into, do you remember how we started working together? Because, a lot of times when we are very surgical about, who we reach out to for our community initiatives, and a lot of people have the assumption of, oh, this is kind of like a party, we kind of come together, it's kind of like a conference, mingling and all that stuff. And you're not the person who would enjoy just that. So why did you even start to engage with us? And then how was that experience different from just a party? And then what kind of leading to also your presentation with us, of course.
Yeah, no, what I like about the storytellers, I feel that it's the one opportunity I get to talk to people who are in my role in different companies. So we have our own challenges, which is different than what our data scientists' challenge are, because I try and fix their challenges all the time, and I try and answer the business needs. But I have my own challenges of how to get funding from executives, how to convince executives that the new model is better than their old Excel model, all these kind of things that I feel talking to someone who is in my role, a leadership advanced analytics role in a company, either small or large company, I can learn from. And also I can probably teach some of them some of the things that I've learned too. So it's a unique opportunity to talk to people in your role that really there's no one else in Canada Post who does my role, so that I can't talk about those kind of things with people within my company because I'm the only one. So that's what I really like about Storytellers. We can share experiences, and what I found with through our first online sessions with the different people, we had so many of the same pain points. And some of the people said, this is how I get around that. And that was great ideas. And we're going, yes, I'm going to write that down. So we had so much in common and we learned so much from each other. So yeah, it was a great experience.
Absolutely. And I remember that you and I did a quick reflection after that people can check out. I think it's on our website in the community section. But you said that some of the learnings that you had kind of translated into maybe not revelations, but concrete learnings that then really started some initiatives in the company that ended up being quite impactful from a business perspective. And that kind of leads us to the presentation that you have as well. But can you give a little bit more context around that?
Yes. What I often found, like when I was younger in business and going to conferences, I would feel it was a successful conference when I learned one little thing that maybe I could expand on to make fit my current situation. Like the seed of an idea was there. And I was able to take it and apply it to my company. And by the end, you might not have been able to see the similarity to the idea that I heard, but it sparked an idea. And also, I used to get a lot of energy from conferences because I see that other people were doing the same stuff I was doing in different companies. You felt like you're part of a bigger community. But as my career went on and on, I've been in business for over 30 years, that I know I don't look it, but but we after so many years, you kind of get, they're all the same. So I was losing that spark. I wasn't getting the excitement anymore. So I stopped going to conferences, but I started sending my data scientists to conferences because I wanted them to have that experience early in their career. So what the Storytellers Forum has done is give me that sense back, because I am looking for that little seed of an idea I get from someone that I can apply, because this is very focused on your advanced analytics leader in your company. What are the challenges you're facing? What are the solutions to those challenges? So that is, and part of my talk later is talking about integrated analytics, which is something I learned from the Storytellers group before someone talked about it. And now I've incorporated that into my mission within the company.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And this is such an important point. And we say this all the time, that at your level, you can always speak to a million different people. There are a million different things you can do. But what we always want to focus on in the community is that 80-20 principle, to come to this engagement, immerse yourself in the learnings, and go through the whole group therapy session and all that stuff. That's great to put in the right emotional posture to receive some learnings. But look for that one or two key ideas that you will be able to actually expand on and develop, because you will hear a bunch of different things, but the goal is not to try to integrate everything and try to act on everything, because if you try that, you end up doing nothing, right? But focus on that one thing that just really fits your data maturity level, really fits your business context, and then expand on that. And also, apart from that, build those one or two key connections, those relationships that is with a person who you can really relate to. Maybe they're in a similar business, maybe you just really hit it off on a personal level, and then invest in that and let that pay dividends over your career. So what was that in that key idea, the integrated analytics? You weren't the only one who was like, oh yeah, actually this makes sense, because everyone talks about descriptive analytics, everyone talks about predictive analytics, everyone talks about prescriptive analytics, but then everyone kind of misses that, wait a second, our goal is to make analytics second nature, to inseam it into the DNA of the organization. So what kinds of ideas did that spur for you, and how did that start to translate into some concrete business results? And maybe at any point, by the way, when you think that the presentation is ripe for actually be put on screen, just feel free to do that as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and what I find with the integrated analytics, it's at the end of my talk saying that that is something we're going to be focused on in 2024, because what I want to move away from, which is where we are right now, is we sit around and almost wait for the business to come to us and say, hey, can you do some machine learning to solve this business problem for us? We don't want to have to wait for that conversation. We want to understand what their business problems are, and we will determine if machine learning is necessary, whether just a simple regression is necessary, whether any kind of prescriptive analytics is necessary. And we will build that and put it through an interface that they're comfortable with, whether that's Excel or a custom app or something. And I want them to feel integrated in the process where they're open up this, let's say Excel, and they can put in some numbers that they're thinking, okay, what if I sell this much to this customer, this much, what happens to the network? And they'll just see the results of that. And they could care less that it's a machine learning program in the background that's giving them that information. They don't really need to know. But I also preach that we want to be very transparent. If they want to look under the hood, we're going to show them under the hood and show them how it all works, whatever their comfort level is and their desire for more knowledge. But if they just want to be able to use the app and we can prove that it works because, okay, this is, in the past, this is how well it's worked. This is how efficient it is. And we just want them to use it as part of their decision-making tool. Keep the decision-making with the decision makers, but this is another tool in their toolbox that helps them make the right decisions.
I always love that approach, by the way. I sometimes bring that example from Steve Jobs because so they had some of the best technology since the beginning, really working under the hood in their product. But Jobs was always very adamant on focus on the user, focus on the customer. That's where you start. And he was famous/infamous for really getting his engineers to make everything super neat under the hood. And the engineer said that they can't even open the Mac. Like, it's designed so that you can't even open it. But then once you open it, it's beautiful. But the focus is on the experience of the user. So in that case, what you mentioned there, and I even wrote it down because it's such an important pain and also very important ambition for our members, is that a lot of senior leaders in analytics and big companies, they start to put these technologies in place, and a lot of times they end up being in the box of the report vending machine, right? It's like, oh, okay, we kind of succeeded, we built all these capabilities, and now the business comes to us always to get those reports. And wait a second, actually now we are on our back foot, being very, very reactive, but the business value is just not there. People ask us for things that they think they need. We keep giving them the things that they think they need. And over time, we just realize that, wait a second, like actually this doesn't really translate into those results that we want, on the bottom line, on the operational efficiency. So the whole idea of moving out on the offense is critical. I always bring this example too, that in the military, we learned in operational arts that there's no such thing as defensive warfare. It literally does not exist. Defensive warfare is a temporary thing, which is only about how to move out on the offense. That's the only goal of defensive warfare, right? So I like that you kind of take that approach of, how can we be proactive and on the offense? So how do you think, how did you go about getting into that proactive state, and how did you start driving that over at Canada Post? I know that you are gearing up to this in 2024, and also, by the way, I haven't seen your presentation, so I intentionally kept it hidden from myself so I can go through it real time with you.
Yeah, and what I found, especially from my general manager and what he was concerned about when I present this to executives, it says, don't use the word prescriptive analytics because they don't want to be prescribed what to do, right? So some of these triggering words that, I use it and I don't even think about it. I'm not like prescribing what to do. So instead we call it like simulation. So what I want to educate them on is that instead of just doing something and hoping it impacts the way you hope it will impact, let's run a simulation to see how much impact it'll have. KPIs are a good example of that. And one thing we're building now is looking at the dozens, if not hundreds of KPIs we have across the country, across the company, and seeing which of those KPIs actually move the revenue number. Which of those KPIs actually move the customer satisfaction number? Which ones are the most important KPIs? Because each department has their own KPIs, but we need to prioritize different KPIs, because just sending out a report with, oh, our KPI is this and our target for that KPI was this, doesn't tell you how important that KPI is to the overall performance of the company. But when we can marry those two and actually have that, we can say, okay, well, if you have a KPI, if you reach this KPI, this value, and this value, we run the simulation, we say, oh, that didn't move the needle at all for anything we really care about. It's nice to have, but it really doesn't help us with revenue, and it doesn't help us with customer satisfaction or employee satisfaction. So what is it doing? Where other ones will say, oh, you moved this a little bit and look what it's done to revenue, right? So that I want to tie it together with the big wins of our company. What are the 2 or 3 things that we really care about to measure? And so those little KPIs could be prioritized better by seeing in simulations how much they actually move the needle.
So this is such an important topic with the KPIs. I just recently posted about this, about the North Star metric. So the North Star metric is a very simple, but I think a brilliant concept, where you actually identify that single metric that actually is important for the entire organization, and you can organize all efforts around that. Now, different teams, of course, especially in a large business, will contribute to the success of moving the needle on that North Star metric in different ways. So they might have different goals specifically of how they want to contribute. So let me give you an example. For example, in our business, like with the data storytellers, our goal is not like, we cannot really measure success, for example, just based on, let's say, revenue, right? Because that misses the point. That's just not the, of course, that's great. That's when you have a thriving business and you have funds to invest in the whole initiative, that's excellent. But if we try to aim at that, we will keep missing the mark. So actually for us, the North Star metric is usually customer focused. Revenue is not really customer focused, even though the revenue comes from the customers. Usually has to do with customer satisfaction. So for us, for example, what we found that our North Star metric is the number of net promoters that we have each year. So net promoter, if you know the NPS score, probably people who listen know the net promoter score. It is someone who actually takes part in whatever you offer, uses your service, and then they rate it either a 9 or a 10 on a scale where the question is, would you recommend us to a friend or a colleague? Now, if we do this, basically you can organize the entire company around that. So let's say if you have a sales effort, well, you need customers in general. We can't get the net promoters without actually having customers. That's great. The sales guys now know that, okay, this is how I contribute to this. On the other hand, when you have the customer service guys whose goal and purpose and mission is to make sure that once we have a customer, they are treated well and they are delighted and we over deliver on the expectations, they can just focus on that. And ultimately, now you have this North Star metric. Now, why I say this is because it resonated with a lot of people. I saw that once I posted it, just popping up all over. So it's a really important a key dimension, I think. And then basically with this, do you want to actually go into the evolution of analytics over at Canada Post?
Yeah,
because I think it's probably the right time for us to dive into the details on that.
Do you see the presentation now?
Yes.
Okay.
And by the way, with the North Star metric, do you guys have such a North Star metric? So for big companies, let's say for Netflix, you would assume that their North Star metric would be the number of subscribers, but actually their North Star metric is how many hours do people spend watching? Or
right.
Uber,
no,
it's not the...
we don't currently have one that is validated by the analysis. So that is what I'm hoping to create by looking at all the KPIs and determining which ones actually do influence, the top things. Mm-hmm. So and finding out and having workshops with the executives saying, okay, what is the most important thing? Right now, our model is fight for every parcel because the parcel is so competitive. But that's not a metric we can measure. So there are other KPIs that are around that. How do we fight for every parcel? What do we do? So, so I think it's currently, something that we can help develop at Canada Post.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Because it's such a fascinating, if you think about it, even for Uber, it's not the number of registrations, it's the number of rides booked. So a lot of times it's not like obvious, but once you look down on that key metric, it just really, really produces value in unexpected ways.
All right. So I will go through this presentation, which basically shows our evolution of advanced analytics at Canada Post and, going beyond prediction. There we go. So at Canada Post, we have a hub and spoke model for analytics. The advanced analytics team is the hub. It's actually the whole business intelligence team, but I'm going to focus on how the advanced analytics team is part of the hub. And the different other parts of the organization, and this is certainly not all the different parts, but pricing, security, transportation, all those different parts of the organization can come to us to get help with the data they have and their business questions. So first of all, what we do is we support the spokes and meet them where they're at. Some of them have a data person in place, or even a data scientist, some of them, and other ones can only do the most basic things in Excel. So we have to work with them on where they are in their maturity and also try to educate them so that slowly they can move up to the level where they're comfortable. And also I help hire data literate people for the different parts of the business that are interested, because sometimes they want a data scientist on their team, but they don't know how to find a data scientist, how to hire them. So I put them through my process, and then I hand them over to that part of the business to work there. But what's cool about that process is that these people build a relationship with my team as well. So they're not like working they're the only data people in their group. I don't want them to feel isolated. So they build relationships with my data scientists so that we can meet and talk about best practices, and they feel that they can work through problems. Because as things get more complicated, you really need to walk through different options and decisions that you make. So we educate the spokes, and we encourage the spokes to do their own analysis, particularly at the descriptive and the diagnostic levels. So the Analytics Center of Excellence, which is us, our hub, and we want to focus on more complex questions. We're moving more into more machine learning, hopefully getting into more AI in the future. And another thing we do is we promote our services. And one way we do that is we go around to the different business parts, the businesses, and we talk about cool projects we've done for other parts of the business. So for route optimization, I may talk to them about how I did a study for transportation that was really cool, and we did machine learning for it. Because all I'm hoping to do is show them the art of the possible. This is what we've done in the past and what we can do. Does it spark any ideas for what your current business problems are, and that you want us to do something similar or related with your data? Because it's no good to just meet with them and say, so what's your business questions and how can we help? Without educating them first on, this is the kind of stuff we do. Because a lot of them have no idea what we can do. So I call that the dog and pony show, because that's just how we present everything. It doesn't have to be related to what they're interested in. What we're showing them is what's possible for our data scientists to do. So this is the analytics maturity graph from Gartner, which I love and use a lot. And basically, when I joined Canada Post as the Director of Advanced Analytics, the data scientists on the team were really only doing descriptive and some diagnostic analytics, and really not doing what I would consider data scientist level work. So over the last 5-6 years, we have moved up this. So I want to talk about how we've gone from descriptive to diagnostic to predictive and prescriptive, and also beyond that. So descriptive analytics is just what happened, right? It's not going to say why it happened or anything, just what did happen. So there we're talking about just describing the data that you have. But this seems simple, but what the main challenge is trying to educate the parts of the business on how to interpret their data. Data literacy, if someone hasn't been through or worked in market research like I did or done a stats course or whatever, they don't understand the difference between the different types of data you might have, the different types of sample, whether you have a census, attempted census, random sample, convenience sample, and when you can do statistical testing. I often get asked, after I have census level data, I have all the data for the company on every employee or, every parcel that went through, and they ask me to run a statistical test to see if those differences are reliable between two groups. And I go, well, they are reliable. I don't need or can't run a stats test on it because it's census data. So there's a lot of lack of understanding on when to run stats. They think that the stats test is going to tell them what is important to talk about, and that is not what stats tests are meant to do. So this is part of the quiz that I give data scientists who are looking for a job on my team, and a lot of them do well on some questions, and they start off pretty easy with just different types of data and all that, and they move into machine learning questions. But this question always surprises me, and so many people get it wrong. So a company sent out an online satisfaction survey to all of its customers. Only 1,200 out of all 7,000 customers completed the survey within the time frame. In this case, the data collected would be considered, most of them say it's a convenience sample, which is not the right answer. And some say a bias sample. And well, yes, it is biased, but that's not actually a name of a type of sample, so that's not correct. And a quarter of them actually get it right and say it's an attempted census. So the lack of understanding between the difference between a convenience sample and attempted census is something that concerns me, but really concerns me is the next question, because these are people with masters and PhDs in data science or a data science kind of level program, and they don't understand how margin of error works. So in the above example, only about 17% of customers completed the survey. How would this low response rate impact the margin of error for this study? 90% of the data scientists who want to join my team say that the margin of error would be much larger than expected. And that is the wrong answer. The right answer is the margin of error would not be impacted because there is no margin of error for a census or an attempted census. Mm-hmm. So this is something that I go around, I have a whole presentation on sampling and margin of error, which I have given in Lunch and Learns for the company, trying to educate them on how to use margin of error and how to identify what kind of sample you have. And one thing that I think a lot of people haven't thought about is that there's always two questions to ask when deciding whether a difference between two groups or any, more than two groups is worth reporting. The first question is always, is the difference statistically reliable? If it's not statistically reliable, you don't go any further. You don't talk about it. It's probably a spurious result. But if it is statistically reliable, you ask yourself, is the difference big enough to be important? And that's not a stats question. That's a business question. Whether or not you think this difference should matter to what you want your business to promote in the future or how you want to address it, because it could be statistically reliable and be such a small difference that really it doesn't matter anyway. It's not big enough to actually talk about. So test statistics to determine if difference between groups are reliable are only appropriate when you have a random probability sample. With census data, or attempted census data even, we already know the data is reliable. So the only question is the difference big enough to care about? You can't do a stats test on it because there is no margin of error. So you don't have standard deviation, you don't have the standard error to be able to run tests. So you only look at it, say, is this big enough for me to care about? And what type of data do I have? So I give the business this kind of chart so they can always know what kind of data they have. They just go through this. Do you have all or virtually all? That means 99% of the data for the population of interest. If you do, you have census data. If you don't, you need to ask another question. Do you have a random probability sample of the population? If the answer is yes, you have a random sample. If the answer is no, you need to ask yourself, did you invite the entire population to respond? If it's yes, it's an attempted census. If it's no, it's a convenience sample. So very easily, you can actually see what kind of sample that you have. So diagnostic analytics, the next level of maturity, is like, why did it happen? So here we're getting into things that will actually try and correlate different responses and try and explain why things happened. And sometimes this is a simple thing that we can give to the spokes themselves, the business areas to do themselves, but sometimes it's actually quite complex. And this is a complex one with classification using random forest. So we use many types of classification models to answer business questions. So random forest, AdaBoost, gradient boost are some of our favorites because often we need to detect mail redirection fraud or other types of fraud. We need to find out what are the big risk factors for letter carrier injuries, those kind of things. In both of those cases, with injuries and with fraud, we run into an imbalanced data problem. And you can run into an imbalanced data problem with, linear data as well, and also with classification. Imbalanced data just means that you have a lot of one type of data, one class, and the other class is like tiny in comparison. And I guess it's lucky for Canada Post that our injuries are very tiny compared to the number of times a letter carrier is out on his route, and also that the fraud is also very tiny compared to everyone who asks to have their mail redirected is usually valid, but a small number are fraudulent. But it's bad for doing analysis because, as you can imagine, we could build a model that's 99.5% accurate and just put everybody in the non-fraud, or just put everybody in the didn't get an injury on that route. It would still be a very accurate model in predicting that, yeah, it's not going to happen because it's so rare. But it will be very bad at trying to identify when is it likely to happen. So I'll just talk about how we actually go about addressing that imbalanced data problem after I explain a little bit more about this potential drivers of injury. So for the drivers of injury, we looked at things that possibly could impact how often a letter carrier gets injured on his route. Another thing, a record for this was not just one letter carrier. It was this letter carrier on this day on this route, because sometimes they walk two different routes, taking over for someone who's sick or on vacation. So we wanted to be employee route day was our record. And we looked at, on that employee route day, we looked at how much mail they're carrying, how much is the walk distance on that route? Is it centralized or is it door to door? Centralized meaning, is it a community mailbox situation or an apartment building? How many stairs? We look at the weather the day of and the weather the day before, because that can matter. And also we looked at the employee features, how old they were, how long they've been a letter carrier, and familiarity with route and things like that. So we had a lot more than just these. This is just kind of the top one that we put into our random forest. So this shows how our imbalanced data problem actually existed. When I put in employee route days as a record over a full year, we used a full year of data. We had 4.9 million records, but only a couple of thousand injuries. So as you say, the employee root days that involved injuries were tiny compared to the other data that we had. So we had to correct this. There are different ways to correct it. One of the ways is that you could actually do clones, sampling with replacement, and actually creating more records that are identical to the injury records, just repeating them in your database. But a better solution which is available in machine learning programs, is the SMOTE technique. The SMOTE technique is a synthetic creation of new records. It looks at the injuries, the records that involved injuries, and it creates a brand new record that is more similar to records involving injuries than it is to records not involving injuries. So it's like brand new, and we can create as many as possible. So once we correct for that, and we've created all these kind of synthetic injury records, we can actually do our decision tree. So this is a random sample of that where we did a decision tree, and the first thing it wants to split it by is distance. If it's less than 18,000 feet, they go this way. If it's more than 18,000 feet, it goes the other way. And take it down. And then at the very bottom, we can see whether or not this kind of path predicts that there would be an injury on the route that has this kind of characteristics, or non-injury. The 0 would be a non-injury, and that just means that the probability is less than 0.5, which is the next. So if we look at the first one, it says 0 because the probability is 28% likelihood of being an injury. And of course, that's 28% after we make the injuries and non-injury records the same. So it's, the chance of an injury is always going to be probably less than 1%. But because we've done this synthetic data, we now have 28% chance there would be an injury. And the 18% is how much of the data actually falls into that category. So it's 18% of records fall into that category. We see on the other end where a lot of them are over 18,000 feet, a lot of them are ones, which means it's likely that there's an injury on there. And we can see the size of the records. Now, the problem with a simple decision tree, where the client really likes it because they can go down a path and they can see, letter carrier is the second most important thing. Stairs are the third most important thing, and all that. And they can see the little tree. But the problem is, if we do another random sample, the tree changes and all these results change. And that's because a decision tree, if you just run one decision tree on all your data, it overfits the data. It fits that data perfectly, but is not generalizable to the future. So, because if we pick two random samples, we'll get different results. So to fix that problem, the overfitting problem, we want to change our single decision tree into a forest. So a random forest actually does many predictions. So it actually runs in this example, it's 600 trees. I believe we did 1,000. You can do as many as you want. And it averages the predictions across all these samplings. This is a bootstrap sample, so it's sampling with replacement, and you go across there and get your predictions. The little bit of unfortunate thing that happens with the random forest is that you don't get a tree at the end because you've got all these trees that are averaged. What you actually get is a relative importance for each of the variables. So variable F in this kind of example would be the most important, but very closely followed by variable B. And then A would be third. And as we work our way down, H really doesn't seem to be very important at all. So it gives us the relative importance on a ratio scale. So that's great. This is the actual results from ours. What we found was actually letter carrier tenure, how long they've been a letter carrier with Canada Post, is actually the top driver. So it is the most important thing, how long they've been a letter carrier. The second most important is maximum temperature. So maximum temperature that day. The third is walk distance. And we actually came up with 7 that had pretty good importance to being a driver of letter carrier injuries. So we wanted to talk about these 7. I'll only talk about the top 3 in this presentation. So one of the problems that come up from this is, well, how do I make recommendations based on this? You're telling me letter carrier tenure is important, but is it those that have been with us a long time, a short time? Like, I don't know how to make this actionable. So in order to make it actionable, you do density charts. So in a density graph, it actually shows where do the injuries spike compared to non-injuries. So here we see injuries are most likely during the first 2 years as a letter carrier. You can see that the red or the pink is much higher in the first couple of years than the blue, because the mixed is where they're kind of the same. And that even up, it doesn't cross over for non-injury to be more common than injury until you get to the 5-year mark. So it's still over-indexed right up to 5 years on the job. Now, you would think that this seems like we need to give more education to new letter carriers, because obviously they're getting injured a lot more in their first couple of years. So there's some training that needs to be done, or maybe they're being more reckless in their first couple of years. That turned out not to be the case, because we're not going to look at this at face value and just take this and say, hey, do more training with them, you'll fix the problem. Because one thing we know, we're in a unionized environment. And when you have been in the union as a letter carrier for the more years, you get more seniority and more ability to choose what route you want. So you get first dibs. If you've been working for 25 years as a letter carrier, you'll get your choice of whatever route you want. So of course, the ones that have been there a long time are picking the routes that are flat, don't have any stairs, easy peasy, no obstacles. That's great. The people who are in the first couple of years of being a letter are left with all the routes that no one else wants. These are routes with lots of stairs, with lots of obstacles, cracked sidewalks. They're the worst routes because no one else wants them. So when I actually looked at years, I had to look at age, because it's not like younger versus older. I wanted to make sure that wasn't a thing. When I look at how young their age and how often they got injured on these high risk routes, the routes that are given to those that have less than 5 years on the job, the high risk routes, I actually found that those that were older did get injured more often than the younger people. So it's not an age related thing. It's purely because there's high injuries. They're high risk routes that are left over for these people that are new in their career. So maximum temperature, the rest go a little faster. Maximum temperature, we found that it was around 2 degrees that it spikes for injuries. And that certainly makes sense, because if the daily high is around 2 degrees Celsius, that's when things, like in the morning, they're probably freezing or they're melting. It makes things slippery, all that kind of thing. So right around 2 degrees. And that's actionable because when the temperature for the day is going to be around 2 degrees Celsius, we can have the depot manager send out or some kind of messaging to his letter carriers. Okay, be extra careful today. It's going to be slippery out there. Make sure you wear your snowflake rated boots, which is something that, we promote. And just to make sure they're aware that things might be a little slippery out there today and it's a high risk day. The last one is walk distance. So longer routes in walk distance, not in time, increase risk of injuries. So as we see, there is where it flips over is about 25,000 feet. So after 25,000 feet, injuries are more prevalent than less. And also this spike here, where there's a lot of non-injuries, these could be mostly motorized routes, where the motorized, they're not walking as far because they're basically motorized route. They're just stepping out of the vehicle to go to a CMB and then back in their vehicle. Rather than when they walked over 25,000 feet, they're walking up and down a lot of streets and that. So what we recommended is that as many routes as possible should try to be under 25,000 feet in walked distance. So the next one is predictive analytics. And this is where we find our team is spending most of our time now, because we want to predict what will happen in the future. So one thing that we do is predict future volumes for parcels. This is extremely important because of Christmas time, where volumes peak. And of course, even as early as April, May, and June, the business is asking us, how busy will peak season be this year? Because we have to prepare. We have to prepare for staffing with machines and all that. And it's like 6 months out from peak, and they're already wondering, how busy is this year going to be? And also the financial people want to know, because a lot of our revenue comes in at Christmas time. So they want to know, are we going to meet our targets or not? Tell us how much money we're going to make during peak. So we use a time series model for this, and that works perfectly because we are dealing with a lot of seasonality, even down to day of the week, because for us, Mondays are busier than Fridays, and Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays are often the day that the flyers are go out. So those are busy. So we're looking at the time series model fits this perfectly. We do a really good job. And actually, our forecast model goes out 18 months. So this is over an 18-month period. How accurate are we? And nationally, we are within 1.6% of actual parcel volume. And that is really great and something that the company didn't have before. Even looking out 18 months, I can be within 1.6%, within 2% of the actual. At the plant level, our goal is to be within 10% because plants are a little more volatile, less volume for a lot of the plants. And some of the plants that have greater than 10% difference between what we predicted and what actually happened, we can actually go back to the plant manager or the network office and say, hey, what happened in Kitchener? Because we were 42% off. So obviously something changed in Kitchener from there. And so we'd like to be able to explain that and say, oh yeah, there was an extra machine put in Kitchener, or they added an extra shift at the last minute, or whatever they did that caused that spike. Prescriptive analysis is how do we make things happen? And so this is where we're getting into simulations. And this is a very exciting thing for me and something I'd like to have available to a lot of the decision makers in the company. So one thing that happens during peak season is that plants get backlogged. So, and we have to get rid of that backlog as quick as possible. But the salespeople want to sell as many parcels as they can, and they know that at a national level, we have capacity. Nationally, we could sell more, but we don't know where or to whom they should sell more because some of the plants are already getting backlogged. So what this does is each one of these rows down below would be a customer. And so let's say for, the Moncton plant, we are selling 435 parcels per day or per week or whatever. This is all fake data, by the way, but could we sell more for that customer that goes through? Because what this actually does is allows you to put new values into the yellow area. Say, okay, what if I sell more through here, more through here? Because that is the originating plant. It's not the plant that it's going to touch through the network. So, but what we know from our simulation is we know that if you sell to Hudson Bay and they induct in this plant, it's most likely going to go to this plant next. That's where 80% of the volume that goes this, because we have the network. So what they do is they plug in new numbers in the yellow, and then they look at the next screen, which will tell them, okay, now that you've plugged in those numbers, this is what happens to this plant. It goes all red. Well, that's not good. So let's try different things. Now, we could, using machine learning and prediction, we could tell them which customers to sell to actually be optimal as far as our network is. But the problem is we can't make customers sell volume to us that they don't have. It's the salespeople who have the relationship with the customers, like Hudson Bay or Amazon. And so they know how much more volume that each customer could sell to us. So rather than us say, hey, go out to David's Tea and tell them to send us 10,000 more a week, and David's Tea will say, well, we don't have 10,000 more a week to sell you, right? That'd be a waste of time. So that's why we give this to the salespeople so they can play. They know which customers have volume that they could send through us. And so they play with the numbers and they try and make this screen as green as possible. So that's one kind of simulation. Another one is doing different scenarios, dealing with that backlog around Christmas. So let's just call this plant one, a major plant with extremely high volume. And during Christmas, it has many weeks of backlog. The yellow is the backlog. And we want that to go away as quickly as possible. So what we can do is we can borrow workers from a nearby plant that is a much smaller plant, but we can send them over to help out with plant one during peak. So what if we send workers from plant two, which is a small plant, not doing as much volume, and send them over to plant one? So yes, that will actually make the backlog in plant one go away really quickly. So that's great. But look what it does to plant two. It would be backed up for weeks and weeks and weeks, well into like February. So that's not good. So we run a different one. What if we just take shift two, a second shift from plant two, so not all the workers, and we only take them for 3 weeks of peak. We don't take them for all peak. What happens is plant one, the backlog clears almost as fast as it does with the first one, but plant two gets cleared up way faster. So scenario two would be the better way to go if we were doing scenarios. So after simulations, what could be beyond prescriptive? Where could we go next as we're doing this? And what we want to do is integrated analytics. And the reason I have a pilot flying some kind of plane here is that's the way I want our decision makers to feel, that they are making the decisions for this, airplane, which is, the company, making decisions for the company, but they have lots of tools and information in front of them to help them make the best decision. So I want to integrate it so that they wouldn't even think about making a decision of any magnitude about what to do with our parcels or the network without actually referring to these integrated tools that we'll give them to help them see through simulations or through predictive analysis what would happen if they do this. So how we're going to do this is trying to build business-friendly apps. And these apps could be any interface. It could be an actual custom app, or it could just be Excel, because a lot of them are comfortable with Excel right now. And just the way I showed you how the sales team, we give them that Excel interface, but it's actually machine learning behind the Excel that's actually computing what it would do to the network. So I want the machine learning and AI utilized without the need for them to come to us and say, hey, Carol, can your team do some machine learning to help us with this business problem? I don't want them to have to say those words. I want them to come to us with a business problem, and we'll figure out a tool for them to use that is really user-friendly and is quick. It can be on their smartphone. It could be on their laptop, and that they can refer to it to help them make the decision. But it will still be the decision makers who have to make the decisions at the end of the day. And that's the presentation.
Thank you so much. This was really cool. And as you were talking through, especially the integrated analytics part of, okay, how are we going to achieve that? It just brought to mind, if you remember the masterclass, that I think one of the first data stories was from Francisco from Microsoft Game Studios, who actually introduced the concept of integrated analytics. And then that was Sarah at the time from Tormund Cat, talking about solving the right problems the right way. So how do you actually identify these key business problems, and how do you engage in meaningful co-creation with your stakeholders to develop solutions? And then that came Dave from CVS at the time. He's actually VP of Analytics and at Barton Associates. So congratulations to him. And he introduced the idea of the apex predator of data science is the app, and how they build that solution in-house that the salespeople ended up calling Disneyland for salespeople. So I really loved how you, maybe just at least partially influenced by some of those ideas, now you articulated this whole vision for Canada Post and really building on some really solid foundations that you showed us. So thank you so much. This is very exciting. And then where do you see the bottlenecks in actually making this a reality at Canada Post? Do you anticipate any key bottlenecks with this, and what are you actually preparing for in terms of executing this?
Yeah, there are a few bottlenecks that we have, because one thing I often get asked for by my boss or other executives is, Carol, can you find an AI solution to this? And to me, that's the wrong question. They should just tell me what their business problem is. I will find the simplest solution that does it may be AI, it may be some other kind of machine learning, it may be a simple linear regression. Sometimes you don't need to take the Learjet when you're going to the corner store, right? Like, we need to stop thinking about how can we be really impressive with our technology. We need to be thinking about what's the user experience going to be, and what is the value that can come from this, because we're looking at what can give the most business value, and we'll find the technique that will do that. So we don't really like it when executives come to us and tell us what methodology to use. We just want to understand the business question. We'll come up with the most efficient and elegant solution for that. The other thing is, it's funny, they want something really sophisticated and want our smart team to do smart things. And then when we give them a brand new model, like our forecasting model, they say, hey, that doesn't match our old model. We're going, well, you asked for a new model. And we're trying to, and they go, well, how come our old model, which we still ran, gives us a much different volume figure than yours? Can you explain that? And we're going, we don't know what you use in your model. We know that we are using the information from the business to come up with, a time series model for this. It's a very different technique. And we believe it's superior to your old model, because they came and asked us for a new model. But then they're saying, hey, it doesn't match. If it matched your old model, why would you need a new model? Is my question. One thing, and I've talked to you, Laz, about this, one thing I'd like to discuss with the team is, what are some ways to respond to those kind of pushbacks we get from the business when they say, hey, how come your new model doesn't match our old model? Mm-hmm. Right? And so one of the things I've thought of is, we need to be respectful to their old model, because we can't say, well, because your model was horrible and it didn't predict anything. We have to be respectful of the way they used to do it, understand that their comfort level is with the old model, but try and persuade them that we want to take advantage of the more power we have now, the more modern techniques we can do now, the amount that we can use machines. And one phrase one of my data scientists uses a lot when he's trying to talk to the business people, and I don't know how much they like it, but I totally agree with it. He says, a computer is always going to be better at taking everything into the account and coming up with a result than a human is. Because the machine, and he doesn't even go past that, that's his one statement, it's always going to be better. So you sitting in your chair thinking, well, this could affect it and this could affect it, so I think it's going to be higher, is always going to be worse than a machine that's looking at the actual impacts of all those features and putting them in exactly the right weight to predict something. A human can't do that. So we have to somehow find a way to gently and move the executives toward thinking like that. The machine is really good at some things. Humans are very good at other things. So we're not taking that decision-making away from them, but we have to trust the machine that it's taking things into account the right way. For the fraud models, I'll give you an example of one thing we're struggling with. is the fraud model takes in mail redirection fraud. So someone actually applies to Canada Post, can you redirect my mail to this address in the future for a year or whatever? And if it's a fraudster, he could be actually applying for a credit card in your name and then redirecting that credit card to his address, right? So we're looking out for fraudsters. We take a lot of things into account. The old address to the new address, like what economic class area is it in? How far away is it? Whether that email address has been used with Canada Post in the last 5 years, is a brand new fly-by-night email address they're using. All these there's all kinds of things. But we rank them in likelihood of being fraud and give that to the security people. But the security people who have been doing it kind of from their gut feeling or looking at things for so long, they look at that list and they see the first one and they go, oh, but then this person actually is moving to a low-income neighborhood from a high, so I think that's going to be fraud. So I'm going to but that's already accounted for in the model. They don't have to add on to it. So if you start adding on with things that are already in the model, you're going to double count them and make that more important. The model is taking care of that. So I'd like them to trust the model more than they do.
Very interesting problems, because just on a technical level, what you mentioned about, okay, there's an objective statement about, look, the machine, computer will always be better at taking everything into consideration. This is an objective truth, but then sometimes the truth hurts.
Yeah.
You know that scene from that movie with Tom Cruise and Jack Nicholson, you can't handle the truth. Yeah. Well, that's just how these situations turn out. And then there are a few tactical things you can do and a few strategic things you can do. Tactical is, I'm just giving you a few examples that we've seen from the past from executives who are up against the same kinds of pushback and internal, sometimes unspoken objections. Because when you tell this to a stakeholder, as you present it in and of itself as the raw objective statement, the emotional pushback is, so the machine, you're saying that the machine is smarter than me and the machine can do my job better than I can do it. That's the assumption. And once that sets in, then that kind of poisons the well. So whatever you want to do after that, it just gets lost in translation. So on a tactical level, what we found that works is called front loading. So what you actually already called out is that, okay, look, there are things that you can do better than the machine. Now, you need to kind of intentionally think about those things and then front load your statement. It's like, look, the computer won't be able to do a million things that you excel at. And you can just bring those examples, those obvious examples. You can even kind of bring light to even the most advanced AI solutions like ChatGPT. They hallucinate all the time. They kind of make assumptions on context. Sometimes it looks good, but they will never be able to do what a human being can do. But the one thing, taking everything into consideration, it's better than humans. So immediately you kind of handle that objection before the objection can set in. So that's like front loading on a technical level. And then front loading on a strategic level sometimes looks like co-creation from the very beginning when you actually address some of those issues. Like, for example, with, how come your model is different to our model? If in your co-creation strategy and roadmap, you understand that and answer the right questions very early on, then you can avoid that coming up late, like further down the funnel. So we always say, even in sales, yes, you can handle objections. It's called objection handling. Sometimes it's necessary, but even better is to close that door before people can even think about opening that door, right? Because in general, you want your stakeholder to be in a funnel of success of, look, we're going to start working together. We're going to go down that route of understanding each other. We're going to propose a solution, and you're going to drive all this value. That's the funnel. But naturally, people always try to escape that funnel because that's just how this works, with a question, with an objection. So kind of intentionally building that process is something that you can use to avoid. And then later on, tactically, sometimes you can just kind of mitigate some of these rough edges. And then something else I wanted to mention, because there are a bunch of things here. But before I do that, data literacy. You mentioned data literacy a few times, and you even mentioned that, prescriptive modeling, people don't like that kind of positioning. They don't like being prescribed things. What do you think about the term data literacy? It's almost like a controversial thing. I remember us bringing that up in a few conferences that we were invited to, and we were surprised by what a touchy topic that is, data literacy in general. So how do you find that? How do you find stakeholders receiving that term, data literacy? Do you guys use that also when you're not within the team? Because I know it's one of those secret handshakes that data people have, right? That, data literacy, you and I immediately know what we're talking about. Or when we talk about all these terms that might intimidate or confuse others, we're comfortable with that. As the secret handshake phrase came from Roberto Moraga from Schneider as well. This is like a storytelling technique. But how do you find the data literacy term?
We haven't had any pushback to the data literacy, but what I find with it when we call it that, everyone thinks they have data literacy until I point out the things that they don't know. Because I think people think reading data is a lot simpler than it is. And so they think, yeah, I know how to read a graph. I know how to do this. But then, because I'm very picky in my data list, is that you don't make a line graph for things that are categorical. A line graph is actually saying that if this point existed, this is where it would land. So if it's like, say it's like, different political people, you can't draw a line graph with it, like it's categorical. So all these kind of things, like there's so many little things that people don't think about when they're creating their graphs. And also talking about their data and what kind of data they have. So I don't mind calling it data literacy. I haven't had any pushback on it. What I really like to do is show them the simple concepts that they didn't know existed, I don't think the average person knows how many data rules there are and when to apply them. And just like when I'm talking about stats testing, they think you can always do stats testing regardless of what your sample is. There's no knowledge that it has to be a random sample in order for a stats test to work. So that kind of thing really is something that we're trying to educate people on. I also thought, as you were talking, one of the things that I'm thinking I should say to executives that are pushing back on, hey, why should I use that? I want to make the decision. I know of this company, and why is your model telling me what to do? I think maybe a way to approach it is that you are going to be so much better at your decision making when you add this tool to your arsenal. You're going to have so much more information to actually make the best decision at the time. You're going to seem like a genius. You're going to see, they're going to think you can see the future because you're going to be so accurate, right? So it's another tool that you can have. And what I really like about data-driven decisions is that you're not relying on something you learned 20 years ago and just always thought was true, because people change, the market changes and everything, where the data is actually telling you where it is now. But I think people get in a rut and are repeating things that they knew to be true in the market 20, 30 years ago and have not updated their knowledge. So the tool stops you from getting kind of trapped in the past. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So true. And then you see, in this case, like how you can frame the whole issue is that, look, this is for people who are already good at what they do. If you're not good at what you do, this model won't help you. But if you're good, it can make you great. So again, just the framing of it immediately now people receive it differently. One interesting solution and approach was proposed by Vivek Patel, who is right now the global head of IT operations and data management at Ampere, which is a semiconductor company. He did lead the data analytics transformation at Intel back in the day. He was on the podcast, I think, like 2-3 episodes ago.
Everybody's moving around, hey?
Yeah. Well, it's just the lay of the land.
Yep.
And he has an approach, a framework, which is called PACE, P-A-C-E, for scaling analytics in the business. Problem solving, accountability, communication and empowerment. And we're going to go in detail into that. People can look it up. It's a really cool episode. But then I think the empowerment, the final one, it's about, look, build, like, do your due diligence, obviously, like, solve the right problem solving piece of find those critical business problems that will move the needle in some of those very, very important areas. So be prudent, be intentional about what problems you will choose to solve and prioritize. Accountability is actually not about like data accountability or anything. It's about when you choose that problem, make sure that your solution will help the business stakeholder to keep others accountable in the business. That's like a useful tool. Communication is which communication channels you're going to use. You mentioned that when people like using Excel, maybe meet them there.
Yeah.
Maybe meet them on the channel, provide value, and then you can lead them later on. And then the final one, the empowerment, and I ended up actually going into detail into this one, but the empowerment is build it for 90%. But do your due diligence, solve the right problem, all that stuff, build it for 90%, and almost just set them up for success and let them finish the 10. So that they kind of have that ownership. Now, with this, the internal objection from someone who is a data executive, there are multiple ones. For example, but they won't be able to finish it at the quality that I would be able to. Or also for our analytics team, I mean, we kind of need those wins. We need that credit so that I can invest more into analytics and get the business on board. But his recommendation is to let that go because that extra 10% that the business will add to it will result in outstanding adoption. Like he kind of has the numbers to prove it. And then it will actually return to you. It will return to you later on that people are just actually using their solutions. And then you can intentionally tell that narrative when you go around what you call the dog and pony show, right? When you actually tell about the work that you've done. Now you have this like long list of success stories that's still yours, right? And you will actually have those champions because those champions later on are much easier to activate because you can return to them a few months later and just they're using that solution that you built, and then you can leverage that. So I'm just throwing around a few ideas of how you can kind of target some of these potential bottlenecks and pitfalls.
Yeah, and that's something I'm looking forward to, Austin, to be able to discuss with people and how they, try and promote these things, because I find the business wants to use real cool tools. And then when you give them the cool tools, they start not to trust them and they're scared of them. And they're thinking like, this doesn't agree with what I think. So it's a balancing act at first. So often what we've been doing, and they're trusting our forecast model now because we can show that we've been really good at predicting for the last 2 or 3 years. And the other model has been really bad at predicting for the last few years. So now we're getting a lot more adoption in that. But I find these things, it's kind of like baby steps, that it takes a while. If you keep saying the same things, and what I like to do is I keep doing these same phrases that we're just trying to do good science. We're not looking for a certain target or anything. Our big win is doing good science, and you take that and you try and reach your targets with it. But I repeat things, and then I hear them saying them, like Carol's team just does the good science, right? Like that's their only goal. They don't have skin in the game for what the model actually pumps out. They have skin in the game for how the model actually does it and how good it predicts, right? So, and I like it when I hear the executives start reiterating these things, which gets it in line with the data-driven business.
Absolutely. And you can have that kind of reputation, which helps you to become, again, something that we talked about on the masterclass, a term I think originally coined by Pete Williams from Penguin Random House, the data conciliary, how that trusted advisor in the business, it's not necessarily someone who just does whatever the business asks for. In fact, the part of the value, very significant portion of the value that you provide is that pushback, the ability to push back. And when you push back in a meaningful way and you actually help the stakeholder to reach what they want to achieve, people a lot of times don't know how, especially with AI machine learning. I mean, who would know if not you guys? It's so new for the business. They just know that it's cool. They just know that they have a desire. They have an assumption about how that new technology can help them, but you're the one there who can actually deliver that. And the part of that will be sometimes just telling them, hey, maybe you need to reconsider. This is why. Let me help you that way. And this requires that ability to sell that, to contextualize and speak into that problems and know that problems even better than they know it. So absolutely, actually, even in Austin, we will go in depth into how to kind of manage that funnel from all angles. So it's going to be an exciting opportunity for sure. And Carol, this was great. So thank you so much for running us through that whole evolution. I also found out a few things that I didn't know, for example, about your professional journey.
Yeah.
And I look forward to continuing the conversation in Austin.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.